If you don't know about Cupra, then you need to pay attention because they've been killing it lately. The Formentor is one of my favorite sporty SUVs on the market. The Cupra Leon hatchback is better than the Golf GTI. And now they're about to unleash this, the new Cupra Leon Estate, which looks like it's about to do some pretty major things. Specifically, it's about to take on the Golf R Estate. It'll use the same 2-litre, 300-odd horsepower engine, it'll do the same 4.9 second 0 to 62 time, and because it uses the same platform, it should deliver the same practicality, all for around £39,000. That's less than a Golf R Estate. So what's not to love? I'll tell you what's not to love. It's an estate, and I don't like estates. Yeah, I know, shock horror, a car guy who isn't into estates, but I just think they're a bit sort of drab. Shooting brakes, wagons, whatever pretentious name you want to give them, I can't stand them. And I know it's a bit rich coming from me wearing this jumper, but that's just how I feel. Me, I'm into SUVs, like this car's bigger brother, the Formentor. Look at it, it's gorgeous, sculpted, muscular, aggressive, higher at the back, lower at the front. It's basically a coupe. It looks great. This thing, I mean, it's just hideous in comparison, isn't it? Look at the size of the rear overhangs. Look how small the wheels look. That, to me, looks like a tiger ready to pounce. This thing looks like a sausage dog.
Okay, I don't hate all estates. There are a few exceptions. The Audi RS6, Porsche Taycan Cross Turismo, and actually, this does have some nice details. It's not too bad, if you like that kind of thing.
Looks, of course, are always up for debate, but one thing that isn't up for debate are these cars' performance statistics, because it is massively quick. It uses the same 2-litre turbocharged engine you get in the Golf GTI and in the Golf R, here tuned to make 310 horsepower. In the Golf R Estate, it makes 316 horsepower, but don't be fooled by that 6 horsepower difference, because this car is massively quick. It uses the same 7-speed DSG, it has the same 155 mile an hour top speed, and crucially, it will do the same 0 to 62 mile an hour time. 0 to 62 in 4.9 seconds. It's such a good engine in this car, it really is. You can really see why so many cars use it. It's super smooth, pulls hard, 400 Newton meters, really very good. But it makes a weird noise. There are 3 main driving modes that you can cycle between using this button on the steering wheel. There's Road, Sport, and Cupra. And in the most aggressive Cupra mode, it makes an odd augmented engine sound. A speaker engages to beef up the main sound of the engine. Now that in itself might not be a bad thing if the augmented noise vaguely sounded anything like the real engine, but it doesn't. It sounds like a mixture of a 5-cylinder and a V8. And I probably don't need to remind you, the engine in this car is neither of those things. Gearbox, pretty decent. Shifts up and down the box pretty well. Unfortunately, it doesn't hold onto the gears. It upshifts automatically when it thinks you should, rather than when you think you should. Luckily, the steering more than makes up for that. It's got a lovely weight to it, and it's quick without being too hyperactive. And there's so much grip and traction. You can really fire this thing into a corner, no matter what the weather, and feel like you're in total control. It's also surprisingly playful. If you're a bit unruly with it, it will throw shapes. Wow. Okay, I might not be the biggest fan of estate looks, but this thing is hilariously good to drive.
Of course, performance isn't this car's only objective. It also has to deliver strong practicality. But is it as good as its bigger, chunkier brother?
Let's investigate that, shall we, with the help of the very fetching Cupra Formentor SUV. It is an SUV, and that means it's quite practical. Electric tailgate, and it also has a 450-litre boot, quite sizable, with a little bit of underfloor storage, in this case for a spare wheel, which is a little bit of a rarity in today's world. How does it compare with the boot on the Cupra Leon Estate? Well, it's not electrically operated for a start, But according to the spec sheet, it has a massive 620-litre boot. It's deeper and bigger. It's actually massive. Plus, it also has some underfloor storage, in this case, also taken up by a spare wheel, which is quite handy. And this parcel shelf is a cut above the one you get in the Formentor. So I guess if you're looking for a reasonably fast car that can transport you and your stuff, maybe Estates aren't so bad after all. The interior is really nice as well. Look how much legroom I've got in this car, absolutely loads. And the front seat is adjusted for me as well, plus loads of headroom. And it doesn't feel claustrophobic in the slightest. Because it's an Estate and it has such a long back, you get this enormous window at the rear, which means that you get lots of light in here and the visibility in the rear is actually really good. The one drawback is that it does have a central transmission tunnel, so that does get in the way, but you can seat 5 adults and you do have a couple of USB ports and individual temperature controls for the rear as well. The front seats are less practical because they're so wide. They're these huge sports seats and they don't give you a good view of what's in front of you. So if you ever suffer from motion sickness, then yeah, that's the only drawback in the rear of a Cupra Leon.
As for the front, well, it looks good with some nice materials, although as with any modern Volkswagen Group product, the infotainment system and climate controls take a lot of getting used to. Have a look at my Formentor review, link down below, to get a feel for that. Speaking of the Formentor, it's worth saying the SUV is terrific fun to drive. It's agile and just as fast as the Leon Estate. It even takes up less space on the road. But the SUV body style, as well as being less practical, will also cost you over $2,000 more. So at this point, I am willing to admit that even if I'm not the biggest fan of the way Estate cars look, they do have significant upsides.
The other big difference between an Estate like this and an SUV like the Formentor is that the Estates will invariably feel more nimble. Both cars weigh the same, 1,640 kilos, but this is lower to the ground, so it feels more agile. You feel more connected to the driving experience. The brakes are exactly the same, 340 millimeters up front, 310 on the rear. But again, somehow it feels like this car is carrying a bit less mass. So ultimately, it just feels better. The ride in this car is ever so slightly better than you might get in the Formentor SUV as well. Not by loads, but because the Formentor sits higher up on its suspension and I suspect has slightly different damper settings, this thing feels like it flows over the surface of the road in a much more composed manner. Speaking of flowing over the road, this car also has the optional DCC dynamic chassis control system, which lets you choose from, and I kid you not, 15 different suspension settings. You can cycle between super soft and super hard, and in its softest setting it really does ride nicely. Not quite Rolls-Royce levels, but it's plush. In the hardest setting it feels a bit like a racing car, and I suspect you'd never use it, but the Goldilocks setting is somewhere in the middle, and it is actually a lot of fun messing around in there trying to find your ideal setting. It's not perfect, of course. I had a little moan about the gearbox earlier on. It's not the snappiest, but it's also not the most refined car in the world. You get quite a lot of tire noise coming up into the cabin, especially at motorway speeds and especially on roads that aren't perfectly smooth. Also, it sounds a bit boomy in here, and I wonder whether that's down to the fact that it is an Estate. It's got a bigger boot, which I suspect makes it act a little bit like a subwoofer, so the whole thing just provides a little bit too much of that low frequency noise that I don't especially want. I think, and it might be in my head, that the Formentor might be slightly more refined.
That's probably my only real gripe with the Cupra Leon Estate though, because on the whole it stands up well, not just against the brilliant Formentor, but against the Golf R Estate and the dozens of sporty SUVs that have flooded the market. Love or hate the body style, it's a good proposition.
Okay, so what I've done here is obviously start this video by saying I don't like Estates, and then spent about 10 minutes convincing you why this particular Estate is brilliant. And I do see the irony in that. But let's just clear things up. The thing I don't like about Estates is the looks. Everything else is brilliant. I can see why people enjoy these cars. The handling's great, bordering on hilarious. It's very practical. It's super quick in a straight line. And it's a lovely car to drive every single day. Would I buy this over the Formentor? Probably not, because I'm a snob and I like my SUVs. But if you're looking for a performance estate and there really aren't that many of them available, then I think you'd be doing yourself a massive disservice if this thing wasn't on your shortlist. Golf R Estate, you've got some serious competition.